I'm sure it seems like such a joke for me to be doing this video well into February. If you study in the UK, you know that most of your exams are pushed to the beginning of the next term. So instead of wrapping it up all at the beginning of the previous term, like they usually do in the States, because it's normal, most of your final papers and your exams are going to be at the beginning of the next term. So while you're worrying about your new classes, you're also worrying about stuff from last term. So I was a bit of a hot mess in January. I wasn't in that headspace to just film new stuff, basically. I still feel like I'd be amiss if I didn't talk about my favorite books from last year. I did read a lot. I read 100+ books last year, and it was an incredible accomplishment for me. And having read that many books, you can guess that I liked some of them, and I'd like to talk to you about some of them. I didn't really focus on eliminating the number of books in this list. I didn't eliminate it to a tight 10, or some people were doing top 17 of 2017. I personally just picked the books that stood out to me, that I was thinking about long after I read them. These are sequenced roughly in the order that I read them. I think the first really good book I read in 2017 was The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. It's about two young magicians who work at a circus that's called the Night Circus that travels around. It is kind of a big international phenomenon. And behind the scenes, they've been pitted against each other in this magical competition. But as they begin to compete with each other, they also fall in love and form this really amazing relationship. I really loved how this novel handled magic. It's not always easy to do magic, right? And I think the way Erin Morgenstern handled magic in this novel is just really poetic. Imagery was amazing. There's a part of the book where the two magicians are basically in conversation with each other. He makes one room in one exhibit of the circus, and in response to his creation, she creates another room. Just such a beautiful image. Some people were so impatient with it because it wasn't the most fast-paced story ever, but it was about the growth of this relationship and how these events slowly occur and come together and culminate. I love that book. My second favorite book of the year was Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. Trevor Noah being, of course, Jon Stewart's successor to The Daily Show. I like his rendition of The Daily Show, but I think I really miss his stand-up a lot. I miss a lot of his storytelling. This book really brings it out, and especially in the audio, like, please listen to the audiobook. It's basically his memoir of his childhood. He was born in South Africa, but he was the son of a black woman and a white man. Because of apartheid, interracial relationships were strictly illegal. He wasn't supposed to exist, really. So the book spans from his childhood years to his early days of starting comedy. The book is so funny, but also it handles some really serious issues: racism, class, domestic abuse. One thing that really did stand out to me, Trevor Noah, he's a very multilingual person. He speaks English, obviously, and some German because of his dad, and also many different indigenous African languages. He talks a lot about how language brings people together, potentially unite people, even when they're from these different backgrounds. It can divide people and also bridge a lot of gap. I really loved that message. So my next favorite book was The Secret History by Donna Tartt. It's about this guy who decides to enroll at this really prestigious liberal arts college, and he wants to study classics. In order to study classics, he has to study under this professor, and he only takes a very, very select number of students. The way he picks these students is just totally, it's just a mystery to everyone. So after a lot of convincing and kissing up, he eventually gets into this professor's class. So the students that are enrolled in this professor's class, they're these kind of idiosyncratic characters. They're a little bit elitist, and our main character has some trouble fitting in. So we get to see his relationships with them, his struggles to fit in, and also some really horrible things that happen as a result. If you were ever in a liberal arts college and you took really small seminars, you might get the vibe of this book. The next book on this list is Three Dark Crowns by Kendar Blake. Three Dark Crowns is like Game of Thrones in a matriarchy. There's this island kingdom, and every generation the queen gives birth to a set of triplets. And when they turn 16, these triplets have to fight to the death for the crown. Strictly speaking, each of these three triplets belongs to a different branch of magic. There's the poisoner group, which specializes in poisons and they're immune to poisons. The naturalists can commune with animals and control nature. Then there are the elementalists who do elemental magic. A lot of people complained that this novel was really slow going, but personally, I really liked that this book took the time to introduce us to all the different characters and also a lot of the politics surrounding these three girls, because there are a lot of people trying to sort of game game the system to get their own candidate on board. Because when a girl from one faction of magic becomes queen, that faction of magic is suddenly much more powerful and has like a much greater presence on the island. So I really loved this book. I read it in a day. And the sequel is One Dark Throne. It came out last year. I have it in my possession. I can't wait to read it. The next book is The Golem and the Jinni by Helen Wecker. This is a historical urban fantasy. It takes place in Victorian, Edwardian New York City. There's a golem who is a creature of Jewish folklore who's made of clay and is very strong and exists to serve. She is brought by her master who has died along the way, and she has to find her own way around this really new city. She's also grappling with her own existence and the terms of her existence. You have a Jinni, on the other hand, who has been trapped inside a flask for thousands and thousands of years and is released when this metal worker just suddenly hits his flask. And the Jinni are mythical creatures from Middle Eastern folklore. They're supernatural beings that are made of fire. And these two beings, they encounter each other and they deal together with how to be human and what it means to be human, how to navigate the human world. In the meantime, there's a corrupt magician who's just trying to hunt them both and use them both to his own ends. The next book I'm going to mention is actually two books. They're two books in a series. They're from the Illuminate series by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. So the two books are called Illuminate and then Gemini. I guess I'd call them sci-fi epistolary novels. The story begins with a corporate invasion of a planet, and that planetary community is forced to escape on a few ships, but they're also being pursued by this corporation in the meantime because they don't want any witnesses of what they've done. And there's a zombie type infection going around on the ship, and also there's a killer AI. I'm not gonna say much more about it. You really should experience the story for yourself. The story is told in government documents, emails, recorded conversation, video transcript. If you're not really into young adult fiction, but you kind of have a sci-fi bent, then I would highly recommend this book series. Speaking of young adult, I read Crooked Kingdom, which is the sequel to Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. So it's basically about 6 outlaws who have been forced to a life of crime by circumstance. In Six of Crows, they were paid to do this really enormous, almost impossible heist, and Crooked Kingdom is about them dealing with the repercussions of that. And there's fantasy in the story, and it becomes much more apparent in Crooked Kingdom. I like to compare it to Game of Thrones, where Game of Thrones, there's fantasy. A lot of the nuts and bolts of the story is about the political stuff going on. The nuts and bolts of this story are really about the 6 main characters navigating the nuts and bolts of the crime world. There's just some incredible character work in this story. Everyone has just these different shades to them. You're just invested in everyone. I love this series. Next up is a book that I wasn't sure that I completely loved when I finished it, but I actually found myself thinking about more and more as the year went on. It's The Diamond Age by Neil Stephenson. The Diamond Age is kind of a cyberpunk, steampunk type story. So in this world, nations don't really exist anymore. Everyone's been divided into different factions. Chinese people belong to one faction. Japanese people belong to another faction. British people, they belong to a group called the Victorians. So one of the characters in The Diamond Age is commissioned to make an interactive book for a really powerful character's daughter. And the book is supposed to interact with a child and help him or her develop and grow. This engineer also wants something like it for his daughter, so makes a copy for his daughter as well as for this other person's daughter. But it gets stolen, and that has some massive repercussions. This book is really incredible. It has a lot to say about class and race. It also has incredible foresight about the ownership of manufacturing today, which is all in Asia, basically. The next book was actually a reread, and that was J.R.R. Tolkien's Fellowship of the Ring. I wanted to reread this series for a while, so I listened to it on audiobook. The Lord of the Rings is not everyone's thing. Some people find it too slow. Some people find it incredibly cliched. Some people find it backward. I find that when I read The Lord of the Rings, I get something new out of it every time. I appreciate the humor a lot more. I read different things into different characters. I think what stood out to me this time around was the element of nostalgia. Not even just like the happy kind of nostalgia, but really sad nostalgia. And what I mean is you have a lot of characters who want to reclaim the former glory of their countries and of their people. You have Gimli, who really reminisces how great the mountain halls used to be. You have people like Boromir, who has watched his country decay for decades and decades and watched his dad go from a very glorious figurehead to being this really nasty person. I think it really speaks to how much Tolkien had that kind of nostalgia in him, to see the world that he once knew kind of devolve into this modern world that he didn't quite understand. The series makes me so happy, but also there's so many sad elements to it. These things I only picked up as an adult. I just want it to be a habit of mine to, you know, periodically pick up the series again and reread it. Definitely for this year, I'm planning to read The Two Towers and maybe Return of the King. Next up is Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. This was basically her answer to Harry Potter, kind of subverting a lot of the tropes like the Chosen One. And it was also a really lovely LGBT romance. It was really happy and sweet, and it was funny. You could kind of see which Harry Potter character had inspired which Carry On character, but that didn't really impede my reading at all. So the next book on this list is Outlander by Diana Gabaldon, the same Outlander on which the show is based. It's historical fiction, but with an element of time travel. The story is about a World War II nurse who is on her honeymoon with her husband when she's transported back in time to 1700s Scotland and gets involved with a lot of the political dynamics going on. And she also gets involved with a very strapping Scottish man whom she marries. Claire Randall, I think, is one of the most resourceful characters I've ever seen. She's just so autonomous and knowledgeable and smart. She's just everything I want to be. I love seeing how she navigated the politics around her. I loved seeing how she applied her medical knowledge to help the people around her and just help everyone she could. She's just a phenomenal female character. Jamie's amazing, but you know, Claire is my favorite. Next up is Eliza and Her Monsters by Francesca Zappia. It's about this girl who's socially very anxious and awkward, but she's also very famous on the internet. She's the creator of this really phenomenal webcomic. It's created an entire fandom around her comic. People do cosplay of her characters, people write fan fiction. One day she meets a guy who writes fan fiction of her comics. She doesn't really want to reveal her identity. She doesn't want to bring that burden of fame upon her. She likes that anonymity. She can't resist talking with this guy, and they form a friendship. But then one day her identity is outed, and that sets off a series of very fast-paced events. I think people compared it a lot to Fangirl in a lot of ways, and people even said it was better. It does handle the mental health aspects of things a lot better. You have two characters who do suffer from incredible anxiety. It's strongly implied that one of them suffers from PTSD as well, and I really liked how that was conveyed. Fangirl is a really fun and sweet story, but Eliza and Her Monsters just takes everything from Fangirl and takes it to the next level. So the final book on this list was also the final book I read in 2017, and that was Dune. This was probably the most important book I read in 2017. It was so nuanced, cerebral, mind-bending, really disturbing at times. I don't even know how to give Dune a proper synopsis. There's just so much to it. In the universe of Dune, everyone has kind of forgone advanced computers in the favor of training their own minds to perform incredibly complicated tasks. They use very basic technology and machinery, anything much more higher level that's done in the mind. So usually science fiction deals with how technology can go to all these different places, but this story is very much about the human mind and the places that it can go, which is why it's such a cerebral story. The main character is Paul Atreides, and he comes from this very powerful, intergalactic, noble family. And there's a lot of plotting to bring down his family because they're so influential and so powerful. And Paul is also a boy genius. His mother belongs to the Bene Gesserit order, and the Bene Gesserit are these really badass females who are really involved in the mystical arts. But one day, a plot against his family is successful, and he and his mother are forced to go into hiding. And it's about his revenge journey and also about his own personal growth to extend the power of his own mind. Dune is probably one of the most poetic novels I've ever read. I mean, it's not really common to find that in sci-fi, but Frank Herbert is just so eloquent. Talks about politics and addiction, trauma, and about relationships as well. Such an important story. So those were my favorite books from 2017. I hope you enjoyed this video. You can follow me on Twitter and Goodreads. Both of those links are down below, and I'll see you in my next video.